Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are cutting right through the noise to get to a frustration I think almost every leader has faced at some point.
Yeah.
Casting a vision that actually mobilizes others. I mean, you've been there, right?
Yeah.
A brilliant, compelling idea is announced. Everyone's excited. The strategy decks look perfect. The plan is flawless. And then, well, then nothing. The momentum just stalls. And your people, they might comply with the instructions, but they just don't commit to the purpose.
And that gap, that chasm between a vision on paper and a vision that's actually embraced in the heart of an organization,
Yeah.
that's where leadership just quietly bleeds out. Our sources for this, they really hammered home an uncomfortable truth. Leaders rarely fail because they lack vision. They fail because that vision, it never truly leaves the secure confines of the leader's own mind.
It stays centralized.
Precisely. And it produces spectators, not participants. So our mission today is to really explore how to shift that paradigm. How to move from that default mode of demanding alignment to the much more powerful act of inviting ownership. We're talking about transforming the simple execution of tasks into the stewardship of a purpose for every single person in your organization.
Okay, let's unpack this right away. Why does a clear, brilliant strategy, something that's often the result of months of, expensive work, why does it so often fail to activate real commitment? It just seems completely illogical.
It does, and that's because most leaders are operating under a really fundamental but costly assumption, and that is that clarity equals buy-in. We just assume that if the message is technically understood, then the motivation will automatically follow. But human history, organizational failures, our deeper sources, they all tell us the opposite is true. This isn't just a failure of, say, communication, it's a failure of relationship. People are not moved solely by what a leader sees. They're mobilized by what they are invited to carry.
That's the core paradox, isn't it? A vision that feels imposed, even if it promises a wonderful future, it immediately feels like a burden, not a blessing.
Which brings us to, I think, the critical distinction that provides the real aha moment here. It's the difference between vision based on control and vision based on calling or invitation.
Okay.
Vision rooted in control is attractive. I get it. It promises efficiency, predictability. It relies on scripting behavior, defining success in purely measurable outliers. But the moment systems become fragile or, the leader turns their back, that control-based vision just collapses.
Yeah.
It produces, at best, compliance people doing just enough to not get fired. And that leads to quiet withdrawal, to apathy.
And compliance is inherently fragile, especially when complexity starts to increase.
It is. Now, contrast that with vision based on calling or invitation. It demands faith, patience. It often seems inefficient up front because you're waiting for conviction, not coercing action. But that delay, that's what produces commitment, creativity, and incredible resilience because people are actively invested in the meaning of the work, not just the management of the tasks.
But practically speaking, how does a leader manage that patience? If vision based on calling demands faith, how do you measure success when your board or, your investors are demanding that quarterly predictability?
Yeah, and that's the essential challenge. You have to measure success differently. You measure the quality of the commitment, not just the quantity of the output. So in the short term, you measure alignment through dialogue. Are people asking clarifying questions, or are they just nodding their heads? In the long term, you measure it by resilience. A truly committed team can weather a storm that would shatter a merely compliant one.
That reframes the entire discussion, doesn't it? And this is where the sources go back to those really fundamental concepts of vision. When the biblical foundation says, where there is no vision, the people perish, the implication is much, much deeper than just have a good plan.
So much deeper. The Hebrew word used there, shazan, is critical. We often interpret vision as, a clever human business plan or a snappy leadership slogan. But shazan actually refers to prophetic revelation, to God's disclosed will. The vision, in its purest sense, is something that's received and discerned, not invented or just projected onto people.
So if we translate that for a modern leader, we're talking about the difference between a vision that is a slogan they came up with versus a vision that is a source they believe they're stewarding.
Exactly. The source of the vision changes the behavior of the leader. When you believe you're just inventing the plan, you feel the need to impose it, to control it. But when you believe you're stewarding something you've received, a genuine insight into the future or the true need of the community, you move toward invitation, toward shared responsibility. The issue isn't that people resist the plan. They resist plans that leave them feeling unseen, unheard, or just unnecessary to the outcome.
Okay, so if that's the principle, that godly vision operates by invitation, not by control, Then where do we see this modeled in practice?
We see it consistently. I mean, think of the great mobilizers. God's way of advancing purpose has never relied on coercion. You see it with Abraham being invited to leave everything familiar, or Moses reluctantly partnering with a whole nation. But a really tangible example for organizational leaders is Nehemiah. Nehemiah mobilizing the people to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem.
Right, that's a massive project. Thousands of diverse people hitting huge resistance. It's a masterclass in project management under stress.
But his approach was a masterclass in shared stewardship. He didn't start with a decree from the king. He started by praying, weeping, investigating the ruin himself, and then testifying to his own conviction. He said, "The gracious hand of my God is upon me." He linked the burden he carried to a divine source, which made it meaningful.
And then, the critical piece, his language of invitation. He didn't just assign tasks.
No. He created a moment of collective resolve. He said, "Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem." That simple phrasing, it transformed the task from what could have been forced labor into a collective necessity. It embodied ownership right at the very beginning. When you say, "This is what you must do," you get compliance. When you say, "Come, let us carry this burden together," you get commitment.
And of course, the supreme model of mobilizing without coercion has to be Jesus and the forming of his disciples.
Absolutely. The call itself was fundamentally relational, follow me. But look at how he taught. He didn't give them rigid scripting or some detailed bullet point strategy deck for the next 3 years. He used parables.
Stories that require interpretation.
Yes. Parables stir curiosity. They demand reflection. They awaken imagination rather than just spoon-feeding conclusions. In a modern context, it's the difference between giving a team the exact 10 steps to follow versus giving them the challenge and the values framework and forcing them to own the solution. This approach, it honors human agency and it cultivates discernment. You are forming disciples, people who think and act with conviction, not just dependents who merely execute pre-written tasks.
This sounds very connected to what the sources were saying about the imago Dei, the image of God and human dignity.
It ties right into the deepest theological foundation of leadership. Godly vision honors human dignity by inviting consent and contribution. When a leader tries to overly control people, for the sake of the vision, they are subtly disrespecting the people themselves. True mobilization recognizes that every individual carries unique gifts. They are not interchangeable cogs, and those gifts are essential for the flourishing of the entire community. You can't control something you're actively trying to invite.
That recognition feels incredibly vital right now, which moves us into Section 3, practical application in our current environment. We're leading amidst serious fatigue, complexity, and frankly, intense skepticism toward authority. People are jaded. They're asking, why does this burden matter, and where exactly do I belong in the story?
And the leader has to recognize that the audience has changed. You can no longer just announce a goal. You have to address that skepticism. This is where the practical shift becomes non-negotiable. Stop focusing on how do I get others to follow my vision and start focusing on how do I communicate this vision so faithfully that others immediately recognize their indispensable place within it.
And the sources provide two fantastic tools for enabling this shift. The first is what they call the vision narrative builder. This suggests vision isn't a directive, it's a story people can inhabit. How does that practically work?
It works because a story engages the mind, the heart, and the will, the whole person. So as a leader, you have to function as a narrative steward. The narrative builder forces you to articulate the vision across 3 dimensions. First, identifying the burden, the current suffering, the true cost of the status quo. You have to acknowledge reality first. Second, tracing its foundation. Is this just a clever idea, or is it rooted in some enduring purpose and values? And third, articulating the transformation, the desired future state, told not just in metrics, but in terms of human flourishing.
So if I'm leading a tech company, the burden isn't slow Q3 growth. It's more like our users are wasting 30 minutes every single day fighting our old software, and that's causing them stress and mistakes.
Exactly. You tell the story of the suffering first, then you invite them to be the hero who ends that suffering. When the vision is narrated well, it does more than just inform. It immerses, it aligns, and it mobilizes because it gives people a role they genuinely want to play.
That makes perfect sense. Now, related to that is the stakeholder alignment worksheet concept. Narratives are great, but the messy reality is always human dynamics. What does this worksheet help us do?
It's basically a map for engagement. It reminds you that alignment isn't achieved by just sending the same document to everyone. It helps leaders identify who needs what. Do they lack clarity? Then they need more information and story. Do they lack trust? Well, then they need real relational dialogue with you or a respected colleague. Do they lack ownership? Then they need a seat at the table to help shape the next steps.
So the goal is diagnosing the relational need, not just repeating the vision louder and louder.
Absolutely. The aim is to align stakeholders through targeted dialogue and genuine engagement, not just through pressure or persuasion. You're seeking unity of purpose, which allows for diversity of thought, rather than demanding some kind of forced uniformity.
I hear the value, but if I have to do this kind of tailored dialogue and narrative building for every single group, that sounds incredibly slow. Isn't that an expensive way to lead?
It sounds slow, but the speed of consensus is infinitely faster than the speed of command. If you ignore this relational investment, the cost is clear. Vision that fails to mobilize produces burnout in leaders who are constantly pulling all the weight, and apathy in followers who are just waiting to be told what to do next. That upfront investment is what creates sustainable, even exponential, momentum through true ownership.
Sustainable momentum. Okay, let's look at the long view then in section 4, sustaining momentum and navigating resistance. Because even a vision that is well invited and genuinely owned is going to hit resistance. What do the sources tell us about handling opposition?
Well, the sources offer a very counterintuitive, but I think necessary framing. Opposition is not failure. It is formation. When a vision is truly mobilizing, it is going to disrupt the status quo. It has to. So when you encounter resistance, whether it's anger, fear, skepticism, it signals that the vision is actually touching hearts and core assumptions.
So resistance is an opportunity to strengthen the vision, not just to crush the dissent.
Precisely. Leaders have to listen deeply to resistance to understand its root. Is it fear of personal loss? Is it misaligned values? Was there some unhealed wound from a past leadership failure that this new change has just exposed? Engaging resistance with discernment and humility is often the crucible where commitment is really solidified and the community itself is strengthened.
And related to that is the critical wisdom of timing. If vision is relational, it can't be rushed. You mentioned this foundational concept. Revelation precedes responsibility.
This is so vital, especially today when everything is instant. Leaders must discern readiness, both in themselves and in their community, before broadcasting the vision too widely. I mean, think about announcing a massive organizational restructuring before the staff truly understands the catastrophic market shift that necessitates the change.
Right. The people haven't processed the burden yet.
Exactly. Premature revelation leads to confusion or, superficial compliance because people haven't had time to process the meaning or grieve the change or understand the foundational necessity. That work has to be done relationally first.
Which brings us to our final synthesis here. Mobilizing vision, as we've explored it today, is fundamentally humbler, truer, and just unmistakably more invitational than any vision based purely on organizational control.
Yeah, it shifts the leader's job from being the central genius who dictates direction to being the steward who connects others to the purpose they were probably already looking for anyway.
So let's quickly summarize the core deep dive takeaways for you, the learner. First, vision is not a directive you announce. It is a shared story and an invitation into a collective purpose. Second, mobilization flows from deeply rooted commitment, which you cultivate through dialogue, not from superficial compliance, which you demand through mandates. And finally, successful leaders are stewards of revelation and narrative, not owners of the outcomes.
And as you reflect on this deep dive and consider your own context, maybe just pause and reflect on this final provocative thought. If your vision were suddenly absent, would people merely miss the instructions and the rules, or would they feel the profound loss of meaning itself?
That is the ultimate metric for the depth of your invitation. Thank you for diving deep with us. Now go explore what kind of meaning you are currently cultivating in your context.